So welcome everyone to today's virtual workshop on cover cropping from Allegheny Mountain Institute. As a note, today's class is going to be recorded and made accessible on AMI's YouTube page. If you'd prefer not to appear in that recording, all you need to do is make sure that your camera is turned off. That's generally something you can access in the bottom left corner of your Zoom screen. And there are two ways to participate in today's class and ask questions, and we do encourage you to ask questions throughout. You're welcome to either unmute your microphone and ask your question at the end of a slide, or you can type your question into the chat box for us to respond to. We will be monitoring the chat box throughout the presentation and asking those questions where they fit best. So if we haven't yet addressed it, it's not that we don't see you. We may be getting to it soon. And we've also left plenty of time for extra questions at the end of the presentation. So again, welcome to this webinar on cover cropping from Allegheny Mountain Institute. And let's get going. My name is Grayson, and I am the Outreach Director of Allegheny Mountain Institute. With me is Pat, AMI's head market farmer and farm manager for the AMI farm at Augusta Health. AMI is an educational nonprofit dedicated to cultivating healthier communities through food and education. Our core programs are our Farm and Food Fellowship and the AMI Farm and Augusta Health. And both Pat and I are proud alumni of the Farm and Food Fellowship, who now represent the AMI farm at Augusta Health through our work. AMI Farm and Augusta Health is a production and teaching farm which nourishes our hospital and community. We've got about 1.2 acres under production. We're organically managed and grow vegetables on the campus of Augusta Health. And this year we expect to grow over 25,000 pounds of produce for use in the hospital food system and community food security initiatives. AMI Farm and Augusta Health believes that healthy food is fundamental to excellent preventative health care. We're bringing gardening and food literacy education to people of all ages because today's food choices matter for long-term health. So the way that this webinar is going to work is that I'll be sketching out the topic in theory, while Pat fills in on more details of how we approach cover cropping in practice, including a sort of virtual tour of where we've employed the technique on the AMI farm at Augusta Health. You're welcome to ask questions throughout by either unmuting your microphone or using the Zoom chat box. And we'll also take plenty of time for questions at the end of the presentation. So here's our broad definition of the practice of cover cropping. It's growing a crop which we have no plans to eat or sell, purely to benefit the soil and the future health and productivity of our farm. And this is not a new practice. Variations of cover cropping have been in use all the way back to the Roman Empire. But today, we're learning more than ever before about what works and why. Today, perhaps more than ever before, soil degradation and soil loss is becoming critical across the industrialized world. And cover cropping is one of the strongest defenses we have against that negative trend. So here we have a list of the many benefits that accrue from sound cover crop management. And while things like weed suppression likely need no explanation, the benefits in bold are those we're going to explore in a little bit more detail. Studies show that cover crops reduce nitrogen loss by 13 up to 94%, and phosphorus loss by 54 to 92%. And if you've ever looked at a bag of fertilizer, whether conventional or organic, you likely recognize nitrogen and phosphorus as a part of the big three macronutrients that they often show you in a ratio on a bag of fertilizer. N, P, and K, nitrogen, phosphorus, and the last is potassium. And in general, nitrogen is one of the main limiting nutrients that cause a plant to stop growing or to stop growing healthfully. plants are really inefficient at taking up nitrogen. The way it works is that there's a lot of nitrogen in the atmosphere. It makes up 78% of the gases in our atmosphere. But getting that nitrogen into the soil and then into the plants is tricky. Nitrogen enters the soil through a couple of different ways. Lightning strikes actually break that gaseous nitrogen in our atmosphere into two pieces, from a diatom to two component nitrogens, that then rain down onto the soil and enter the dirt that way. It also enters through the inputs of animal waste, through fertilizers, and through organic matter that are breaking down into the soil. But once it's in the soil, it's not necessarily in a form that plants can make any use of. It relies on a symbiotic partnership of rhizobium bacteria, which live on certain kinds of plant roots, to break it into a form that plants can use. And rhizobium thrive most on legumes like peas, beans, and certain cover crops like vetch. You can see that that conversion is taking place when the roots of those particular crops form the little nodules, like on the inset photo. They've got little bulbs that are forming along the root, and that's where you know that nitrogen is being stored. So a cover crop like field peas host a lot of rhizobium bacteria, and they're storing a fair amount of plant-adapted nitrogen in those root nodules. Then we got the peas down. So the plant is dying. They can't really have any more use for that nitrogen, and they let it go into the soil. And now it's free for any plant to use in a form they're ready to take up. And as a result, the wasted nitrogen is far, far less than it would be otherwise. So let me add too that this effect relies on a really healthy soil ecosystem for it to really take maximum effect. It doesn't matter how much nitrogen you add to the soil, how high that ratio of N to P and K is, if you don't have the healthy root network to host the rhizobium that transforms it. So if you keep adding nitrogen to an unhealthy system, most of it is lost. It's lost back to the atmosphere, and a lot is lost to runoff from rainwater that has detrimental effects on our ecosystem downstream. Whereas if you have a healthy system, a regenerative system or a sustainable system, much more of that nitrogen is being used by the plants for healthy growth, and you need to add less to the system. Cover crops do that for us.
Yeah, so we're going to take a closer look at organic matter, because that's the hot topic when it comes to soil health. First, before we start talking about the benefits of organic matter and what they do here on your slide, I just want to explain organic matter a bit. So there's organic material and there's organic matter. Organic material is everything like leaves and lawn clippings. Pretty much anything living from a plant is going to be organic material that you can reincorporate into your soil, and it might take some time. What organic matter is the black humus that you see in the soil. That's the fully broken down organic material. So there's quite a difference when you're looking at soil and you see a bunch of leaves and stuff. That's not actually organic matter, that's organic material. And the reason why organic matter is so important is it just serves all these purposes in the bottom. I'm just going to run through the soil structure, soil life, and the elemental cycles. Really organic matter serves as kind of a sponge for the soil. So along with this, like what a sponge does is soak up not just water, but also nutrients as well. It holds water, it has the ability to release the water to the plants a little more accessible too. Like a heavy clay soil typically holds a lot of water as well, but if you don't have enough organic matter in there for the plant to access the water, the clay soil is going to struggle. So the organic matter is actually better for the soil, health, for the plants to access water and nutrients. It's also going to aerate your soil, so provide pockets for your roots to grow and your beneficial your mycorrhizal, your earthworm, stuff like that is also going to aerate, but it also allows an atmosphere for them to thrive in as well. That just promotes plant health. The more organic matter, as I mentioned, the more nutrients it's going to be able to hold, the more water it's going to be able to hold, and that in turn it's going to be more beneficial for your plants to access those materials or those nutrients and water. And the higher the organic matter in your soil, the better. Like here in Virginia, like 3%, as I hear, is pretty good. On our farm here, we're very lucky. We're as an old cattle operation. So we're looking at like 7% organic matter here. And where I'm from, originally Wisconsin in the Midwest, you're looking at like 16, 17% organic matter on the fallow land. And that's incredible, the amount of nutrients that can hold. So the idea of plant it and get out of the way came from the Wisconsin area. So the higher organic matter in your soil, the better. And there's many ways to see that. If you're like, you can take soil tests from many different, a quick Google search will pop up. Like I think Virginia Tech does a free one if you're interested, and they'll show you, there's how-tos how to do that too if you're looking to test your organic matter. And some of the elemental cycles, Grayson's about to talk about mineralization here in a second, but like carbon sequestering, if you're not familiar with that, the more green we have, the more healthy plants we have, the more carbon can be sequestered from our atmosphere. So having high organic matter is going to lead to healthier plants sequestering more carbon from our atmosphere. So yeah, anything to add, Grayson?
Yeah, just to add the relevance of cover cropping to organic matter comes from that last stage where we're going to chop down or terminate our cover crop. We're going to till it in, and then we're going to give it time to decompose. As it decomposes, it reaps all of these benefits for our soil life. It improves the soil structure. It gives our biology, our worms, our microarthropods, our critters something to eat. And then it has that benefit to the elemental cycles, meaning the nutrients in the soil as well. So really it's one element that keeps on giving in many different aspects of the soil health. It's powering many of the other things that we love. So we have a question in the chat. How deep down do the benefits go? And that is an excellent question because it's what I'm going to talk about next. So as we saw in the preceding slides, many of the nutrients that are entering the soil system are coming from the atmosphere, from input, and also from inputs like manures, composts, and amendments. And it's coming from decaying organic matter. And most of those nutrients are fairly close to the surface level of the soil. But not all. Plants need about 16 essential nutrients, and while we most often think about the macronutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, they also need more trace minerals like zinc and copper. And while the decaying of the organic matter is happening pretty close to the top where all our life and our critters live, the mineralization, the breaking down of compounds into distinct components, single molecules of nutrients, is happening much, much deeper in the soil. Those minerals like zinc and copper, manganese, are found in that deep, deep region. And other nutrients, even the large ones like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, move down in the soil if they're not taken up by plants through a process called leaching. And leaching usually happens in less healthy soils. Why does this matter? It matters because most of the vegetable crops that we rely on have fairly shallow roots. So if they don't have any help, they may be deficient in those deep minerals. A cover crop can help us to bridge that divide. As you can see in the graphic that's on the right hand of your slide, something like alfalfa has extraordinarily deep roots that can reach down into that mineral zone. and can mine those nutrients, take them up into the roots, and bring them to the higher levels. Then we chop down that alfalfa. It lets go of everything it's been storing in the roots. And those deep mined minerals are now available for any of our more shallow rooted plants to use as well.
So looking at cover cropping on more of a scale that's outside of a home garden, or a farm the size of ours, which is just over an acre, it's becoming a lot more popular to cover crop in cash crop areas with corn, soy, and wheat and all that. And then it's also there's a lot of farmers grazing cover crop pastures as well. There's a lot of benefits to this. Not only does it provide cover for your soil during the winter time when like say a cornfield goes fallow, it also extends the grazing season by 3 to 4 weeks later in the fall just by choosing the right cover crops, and starts at about 3 to 4 weeks earlier in the spring if your systems are set up right with the right cover crops. And this is allowing on a farm scale like in Virginia or in the north, instead of having cows inside feeding hay, that expense is now taken away and given to the grazing in the field. And cow manure is, as you can see, it's free fertilizer. The more animals you can get on your pasture or your soil, the better, if they're managed correctly. And then, like I said, ranchers save on feed. And the more water, the more organic matter from those cover crops and the manure combined, the healthier those plants are going to be, and the healthier the cows and your livestock are going to be as well.
Cover crops can also break up those pest and disease cycles that can become really concerning on a farm. So all cover crop mulches, and in this sense we mean not only while the cover crop is growing, but once we have cut it down and laid it across the top, and really built up that kind of mulch effect, those mulches reduce the splashing of soil-borne pathogens onto leaves as compared to bare soil. So when you think of rain falling on bare soil, it causes soil to splash up, and that can often be a real problem on farms and gardens as it moves disease around. But when we have a cover crop to absorb that impact, we have less splashing and less movement of the soil-borne diseases up onto leaves that are so vulnerable to them. And some cover crops, like Sudan grass, brassicas, and mustards, do even more than that and reduce populations of verticillium wilt and other soil pathogens. The increase in overall soil activity, having something growing, and the diversity of microorganisms that inhabit the soil may suppress other soil diseases too. Some cover crops impact plant pathogens directly because they release toxic compounds that are unfavorable to the growth of fungi. And the other benefit has to do with communication between plants, which is possible through the intermediaries of mycorrhizal networks in the soil. When plants are terminated, they release a signal to their neighbors to shore up the defenses. Therefore, in addition to direct effects on plant pathogens, many cover crops trigger the plant's immune response. And that's the response that protects it from infection or post-defense response. So that signal to protect yourself, there's some kind of danger here, is often enough to wipe out larval pests that are hiding out in the soil or the remnants of soil-borne diseases like tomato blight. Cover crops also increase the numbers of beneficial organisms. And that's a benefit that we haven't really focused on, but you saw on that full list. Beneficial organisms both above the soil, as we've got pollinator-friendly blooms on a cover crop like buckwheat, but we also have friendly beneficial organisms at soil level and in the soil, as we have got a healthy soil food web community.
Yeah, so as Grayson mentioned earlier, we did a few short clips on just how we seed and do things on the farm here. I'm preparing myself to watching yourself or hearing yourself talk's a little strange. So I'm mentally preparing myself, but this is all about how we seed our cover crops. And I kind of try to describe, on a scale of a home gardening scale and on the scale that we do. So let us know if you have any questions after watching the video. Here we are in our block that we rotate a lot of crops out of throughout the year. So these are our last crops in, and we just cropped out a row of radishes here. So we're gonna sow a cover crop. It's winter rye. This purpose of this cover crop is just gonna be get roots in the ground for the rest of the season while these other ones come to maturity. I just don't want to leave the ground bare. And that they're not, winter rye can typically run through, it can overwinter. We grow it around the farm, as you'll see. But it can overwinter and then grow up to about chest height in the springtime. That's when you want to incorporate it. But like I said, for this purpose, we just want to get some roots in the ground, and we're probably going to terminate this at a couple inches sometime in November. But the way we sow this seed, I have my handy dandy harvest bucket that I put our cover crop seed in. This is winter rye. Just looks like it's a grass seed. So what I do is I just broadcast over the row. Some people have seeders where they seed out at certain spacings. I like a good stand of cover crop, like just throughout, like you would see kind of patch of lawn. But there's measurements you can weigh out how much per square foot. I don't necessarily do that. I just give it a nice broadcast throughout the row. I don't lay it on too heavy or too light, somewhere in the middle. So I'm just going to lace them on right now, and I'll show you how I incorporate them. It's just a nice gentle lay on. Sometimes I just watch your seed. You see a spot you missed, go over it a little more. So after I've broadcasted my seed, you want to incorporate it into the soil a bit, and there's many ways to do that. Out here on our farm, we typically use our BCS tractor with a power harrow. That is a light tiller. It tills about maybe an inch or two in the soil. That gives a nice covering. But for home garden scale, I've tried raking in with garden rakes. You can put hay on top of it or straw. You can put compost on top of it. You just want to get those seeds covered. But careful when you're using a garden rake. It tends to be a little heavy when it's moving the soil. So this is called a tine weeder. It represents kind of like a leaf rake at your home. This will do a nice covering of just an easy dusting of the soil. And yeah, I'll show you how it works. And it's just nice rake over the soil. Make sure you get every spot that you put your seeds. Make sure you're covered. After that, I try timing it out here, either with a rain or a water. So if there's rain in the forecast, like tomorrow or tonight, it'd be a great time to seed. However, it's not. But tomorrow, I'll probably water some of this block, so I know that this block's gonna get some water at least within the day of getting seeded. That way, you'll make sure your germination is really high in your cover crop. So.
Are there any questions so far? I know I just saw a question in the chat about the best time of year to start a cover crop. And we're going to get into far more detail about that coming up in a few slides. But the short answer is many times of year. There's a right choice for about every season. Other questions so far? Okay.
Here we are.
Technical difficulties. There we are.
Cool. So when I'm thinking about choosing a cover crop out here on the farm, do I sound good, Grayson?
Yes, I can hear you
cool.
well.
When I'm thinking about where to plant, what type of cover crop to plant, what type of cover crop to plant, at what time. A lot of factors go into this, and it's we're about to dive in. This next slide is going to be a lot of the which cover crops to choose at which time of the year. But you just want to have a vision of what you want, where you're going to plant in there. So right now on my farm, I have a lot of stuff that's overwintering, and there's going to be terms like overwintering and winter killing, which we're going to get into in a little bit too. But I know that the spots where I'm overwintering these crops, that they're going to go into, they're going to grow in the springtime, get pretty tall, and then we're going to reincorporate them in the spring, knowing that I'm planting my summer tomatoes there, for instance. But if I wanted to have, early radishes and like plant radishes in March, I wouldn't do that. I would choose a crop that was either going to, get killed by the frost in the fall, or just don't cover crop and just mulch it at all. And there's plenty of times of the year for the certain cover crops, like stuff like when you think cool weather crops like peas, peas aren't going to grow, even cover crop peas aren't going to grow well in the summer. So that's going to be a fall and a spring cover crop. But there are some better summer crops that are more your grasses, your Sudan grasses and your millets, and your buckwheat that really thrive in the summer, versus cool weather stuff like rye and other things like that. As Grayson talked about earlier, there's a lot of certain cover crops mine certain nutrients in the soil that it can mine them out. Like for instance, what's happening in one of my friend's farms is a huge phosphorus issue, so he's using Sudan grass to suck that phosphorus out and cut it out of his garden and compost that mulch. So if there's soil issues, there's definitely cover crops out there that can mine those, those nutrients. And then having a priority for your land, as I was talking about earlier, is like, on a small scale, what are you planning on planting there? Is it going to be, direct seeded something? Because then you don't want to have a bunch of residue in your bed. Just things like that you think about when you're planting your gardens and your farms. And then ultimately how much you want to spend on your cover crop seed. There's more expensive mixes that you can buy that are already pre-mixed. Like I buy mine from Johnny Seeds. They sell a overwintering cover crop mix that consists of, winter rye, winter peas, vetch, clover, stuff like that. That's already pre-mixed that I don't have to worry about. I pay a little more, but I don't want to have to mix that myself. So, yeah. I saw a few questions on.
Let's look at some of the specifics on choices, and this may answer some of the questions that are popping up in the chat.
Sure. So these are broken out in spring, summer, fall, and then kind of a late winter, fall as well. And you'll see a lot of overlap between the spring and the fall. But early spring, you're looking at your field peas, your grasses, clover, fields vetch that I mentioned earlier. You can get a good crop of that, seeded in March. And what that's going to do is, your grasses are going to provide, your oats are going to provide your weed suppression, your, fast growing. They're going to provide a kind of a trellis for your peas to grow up to as well. Where your nitrogen fixers, your peas, your clover and your vetch, that's going to be what's going to be fixing your nitrogen in your soil and getting all the benefits of that. And all that's going to turn into going back to organic matter. That's all going to turn into that organic matter. But that'll all start flowering, late spring. Then you can come back with, in the summertime, like Sudan grasses, millets, buckwheat's a great one because it's 30 days. And that's what I use a lot of buckwheat on the farm. As you'll see in a few videos here. And it's a good weed suppressor. It's a good beneficial attractor. I love using buckwheat. And then again, going back to, overwintering or winter killing. I see we're broken out here into winter kill and overwintering. Winter kill is going to be that crop's going to die in the winter, and overwintering is going to last throughout the winter and grow in the spring. And again, using winter kill as a mulch is going to be a great way to keep your soil covered throughout that winter and have a quicker access to those beds in the spring. So when, like for instance, on our farm, some buckwheat's going to winter kill right now. And I'm going to use that to plant radishes in early March because I'm going to have those beds shaped and ready to go. So yeah, I'm perfectly fine with winter killing. I think that was one of the questions. Let's see here. Yeah, perfectly fine to winter kill cover crops, and you can leave them in the soil until you're ready to plant in the following spring. I'm not too familiar with cowpeas, but I'm assuming any kind of pea we're looking at is going to be like nitrogen fixer. So, and that is cowpeas being like a cash crop kind of for harvesting. And your peas, your snow peas and your snap peas are still going to fix nitrogen in your soils, and you can still use those for a cover crop, like somewhat a cover crop. You're asking more of that plant. It's the nutrient, like the nitrogen isn't going to be as strong as it would be when it's flowering versus when the pod is out. So that's on cowpeas and snap peas and snow peas and stuff like that. And then it is not too late to plant a cover crop, although we're getting down to it. Probably next week or so, you need to get one of these winter peas or winter rye or clover vetch, something like that in there to germinate. So
one of the things that I like so much about this chart that makes it so useful is that you can go through some of the considerations we looked at the last slide. You can start with, what season is it now when I'm considering putting in my cover crop? And then go down to, well, how much time do I have? And those two considerations together might help to narrow down your choices. Then you can go to, do I need to solve any particular problems? And that will really help you to find the right choice for you. It can be a little bit overwhelming to look at. I have so many options for what cover crop to put in, but there is probably a smaller number of choices that match up with your timing and your needs for the soil. And so looking through a kind of reasoning like this of knowing you have the season in front of you, you have a certain amount of time until you have a plan for the land, and you have some things that you want to accomplish can really help to narrow that down. Before we move on, Pat, do you have a recommendation on seeds for hairy vetch? Johnny's?
Johnny's or high mowing organics. High mowing organic.
Okay, I'm going to start the video and hope if your sound comes back.
Am I on?
Now you are.
Hello. I use high mowing organic if I'm looking for organic seeds specifically. Sometimes Johnny's is a little hard to decipher through what's organic and what's not. So high mowing organic I use a lot for cover crops especially. Plus they have free shipping over $10, so that's another benefit. Trying to think of some local places that would have it. Probably Seven Springs in Floyd, Virginia, if anybody's around there. That's about all I can think of, though. Maybe Valley Produce Supply up in Dayton might have some too.
So our next video answers some of the questions we've been getting about the differences between winter kill and, I'm sorry, that's coming up soon. This next video is more about timing. So I'll play it and we'll get going.
One of the many questions I get when it comes to cover cropping is, how do you know when to terminate your cover crop or kill your cover crop? And how do you incorporate it into your soil? There's a few rules I go by. Right now we're in our buckwheat cover crop that actually had some frost damage. Some of it still lived. It's kind of weird how it works here, but anyway, this buckwheat, when it goes to flower, so you see these white flowers on the buckwheat, I usually give it another, in this time, things are growing a lot slower. So in spring and fall, I'll give it like another 5 or 6 days here to let the pollinators get in there and enjoy the buckwheat. But if it was sometime in the summer, being within a day or two,
because you don't want that buckwheat, especially buckwheat, to go to seed, because that's going to take over your garden. And that's kind of rule of thumb for almost all of the cover crops. When you see grass cover crop, when you see that grass head start to peek out, or any flowers starting to form on peas or vetch, when those flowers start to form, that's the perfect time, because then that's when the especially nitrogen fixing cover crops like peas and vetch, that's when the most nitrogen is in the roots. So you want to get that mowed down, and you want to incorporate as quickly as possible. And the way we do that out here is, again, we have a BCS, so we have a mower, a flail mower. What it does is it chops up the cover crop really nice and fine and lays it down, not like a normal mower where it kind of sprays it. A flail mower lays it down right where it's cut, and then we come back in with a power harrow and we lightly till to get soil on top of that. And then we cover it usually for a couple weeks with a black tarp to break down that material even quicker. Those are things you can do on a home scale as well. If I was terminating a cover crop on a home scale, I might weed whack it, or I might just mow it with a mower. Like I said, even though it's going to kind of go everywhere, it's pretty easy to do that. You can also crimp your cover crop, meaning you can step on it with a board, as a picture was displayed or is displayed now or earlier. That'll lay the cover crop down, kill it, and then you can plant into your killed cover crop that isn't necessarily shredded up by a mower. So yeah, and then you want to get soil or compost on top of your cover crop if you're looking to break it down quickly. And like I said, we use these big black tarps to break it down. But if you're looking to break down your cover crop faster in the summer or the spring or the fall, put a piece of landscape fabric or any kind of black plastic over that. It's going to heat your soil up, creating that getting that microbiology really, really active to break down that green manure. So.
You didn't miss the photo of crimping cover crop. Here it is in front of you. Sometimes we get questions about, okay, we know that we want farmers to use cover crops, but does it make sense on a home garden scale? The answer is absolutely. It's great to use some cover in your home garden, even a raised bed. And it's especially great if you are breaking ground you've never used before to create a garden for your first season. To use that cover crop to build some organic matter, to mine those nutrients, to really break up the structure of the soil, and to get all of these benefits that we've looked at throughout the presentation, so that when you are starting a new garden space, you're starting it off really healthy and in the right manner. Anything to add here, Pat?
Yeah, just to go off again, what you're seeing here is that's a cover crop that was, ready to be terminated. And our farm manager Dylan up on the mountain, he hacked together a board and used a string and just stepped on it and killed it and planted into it as a mulch, and it worked really well for him. So you don't necessarily have to, incorporate so fast like we do here on our farm, but so that's another way to go about it.
Now we're going to look at some case studies from how we are using different crops around the AMI farm at Augusta Health. So first, we're going to take a closer look at that buckwheat. Maybe. There it goes.
Here we are in our buckwheat patch. I like to use buckwheat throughout the season. It's a quick growing crop, very quick to germinate, very fast to grow, suppresses weeds through just the quick growth of the cover crop. And the reason why I chose it right here, again, it's October 1st, so you can see we had a light frost that killed. It's very, very frost tender, so if it frosts at all, it's going to kill your buckwheat. But the reason why I chose this is because it was about mid-August when we finished these crops up. I was hoping to get a nice flowering cover crop before the frost. And then when we look at winter cover crops, there's two different categories. There's winter kill and overwinter. And the reason to choose a winter kill cover crop like buckwheat, meaning winter kill meaning that it's going to kill on a frost, and overwintering meaning it's going to live through the winter and then grow in the spring, and we're going to incorporate that. So the reason why I chose buckwheat and the reason why I want a winter kill here is because I want to keep this area covered I don't want to use a tarp. So when the buckwheat dies, those roots are still going to be in there. The plant's going to fall over and create, have a mulch, a dead mulch on top of the soil, so covering your soil throughout the winter. Unfortunately, it didn't get as big as I wanted it to. However, it's still going to serve its purpose. And it's still, even behind me, you can see it's beautiful, but right next to Grayson, if you want to span here, this is where we had a winter kill problem. It's kind of funny how the frost didn't frost up here, but down here it did. So, yeah, that's the reason why I chose buckwheat. It's a great cover crop. One thing to be conscious of is it is allelopathic, meaning that seeds don't germinate after 30 days after you've grown the plant. The roots will inhibit germination, which can be a benefit to your garden, but it also can, if you're using this in the summer, which it is a really good summer cover crop, you'd want to transplant into it, not direct seed, because it's going to inhibit that direct seeding.
Here we're going to look at a slightly different section of the garden. Here we have had 2 different cover crops in succession to serve different functions after we had harvested all the spring peas that were in this space earlier in the season.
So here we are in one of our 50-foot blocks that I leave fallow for a year. So in the spring, well, not completely fallow. In the spring, we grew all of our peas here. And the reason why I don't say completely fallow is that we got a benefit off having sugar snaps and snow peas. But those also can argue as a cover crop because it fixes nitrogen for your soil. So by saying fallow, I mean we're not growing in here all year. So we're cover cropping and we're building organic matter and just soil nutrients. So after the peas came out, we went through with our flail mower, as I talked about earlier, and we mowed down the peas, incorporated them, covered them with a tarp, and then we let that sit for 2 or 3 weeks. Then we uncovered and sowed a crop of millet. And millet's it's my first time growing millet. It's a quick grass, so it's not going to be a nitrogen fixing. There's no real super nutrient benefit to the soil. However, it's going to provide organic matter, which is one of the biggest things, just with all the grass being reincorporated in the soil. But what I like about it is it's like buckwheat. It's a quick growing crop. So it's like a 40, 50-day grass that does well during the summer. It's a Sudan grass. So it's a category of a Sudan grass, if you're familiar with that, which is it gets really tall and provides a ton of organic matter for that green manure. So, and there's an example of what I spoke about maybe earlier, is that this is the point where you want to terminate your millet. This is the grass seed head. It's one that got away from us when we were mowing it in. But this is when the grass is starting to poke out, when it's just starting to look like this, that's when you want to mow it in. So we mowed this, and then I came through and I broadcasted oats and peas. This is oats and peas right in these 6 rows. Actually, we tried sowing in all 8 of these rows, but I came through with a power harrow or a tiller, and I incorporated those seeds into the millet. So I tried tilling an inch, but to be honest, it's a big pain in the butt. So these last 2, I'm just going to experiment and see what it is like not covering your seeds. So I broadcasted on the last 2 rows, and you can see that hardly any oats and peas have germinated on there, and these 6 rows are looking great. So that's just an importance of getting your seed germinated in cover crops. Oats and peas are going to be great. So these are going to live. These are not going to overwinter. They're going to winter kill at probably around 25 degrees with a hard frost. The peas will die and the oats. What we're going to do once that happens is we're going to mow this in, shape these beds, incorporate all this organic matter, put compost on, cover it with a tarp for the entire winter, and then springtime it's going to be a lush, beautiful garden to plant in with radishes and turnips and early stuff. So this is our big soil building block right here.
So we should
add to that, that was the importance of like sowing, going back to my first video was like covering your crop. I think I sound like I stuttered a bit, but covering your seeds, how important it is. And that block really showed it, just trying to, germinate on top of or just broadcast on top of that soil versus incorporating it. That was a very good example. It's been out here.
So we've shown you 2 winter kill examples. Now we're going to look at 2 places that we have overwintered crops on the AMI farm at Augusta Health.
So here we are we have 2 cover crops that we're going to have overwintered production or overwintered cover crop in. Again, overwintering meaning is that it's going to live throughout the winter, or most of it's going to live throughout the winter. It's going to stay, stall at like, a foot maybe of growth, and then it's going to live through all the frost, all the snow, and then in early March, April, we're going to see tremendous growth out here. It's going to be upwards up to my chest, and then it's going to, I know the clover and the vetch will start flowering, and that's time for us to mow in and then incorporate. We're going to have this beautiful cover crop to plant into come springtime next year. But we have 2 different varieties, 2 different blocks right here. One block to my right, this is vetch and rye, and this is very simple block. The vetch and the rye are going to overwinter. The rye is going to grow up a bit. Vetch is if you just grew vetch by itself, it would winter kill. But because the rye is going to get it's going to be just a bit taller, it's going to protect that vetch from extreme frost. So it kind of like the rye serves as an insulator, and it serves as a platform to climb on because vetch sprawls. So the rye, it climbs up the rye, but also is insulated by it a bit too. And like I said, it's going to overwinter. And then we'll incorporate this, maybe next spring. We have plans for this block, but over here, this one's a little more complicated. This is a mixture from Johnny's seeds. This is vetch, clover, pea, winter rye, and oats, I think, are in here. And it's a little more not complicated, but the peas are actually going to die. They're going to die in about mid-November. But when the peas die off, we're just creating nitrogen. But when they die, they're also going to create kind of a blanket for the vetch too. So there's a few winter kill cover crops in here, like the peas, and then everything else is going to overwinter into next spring. And again, the benefits of overwintering is you're keeping that soil active. The roots are staying in the soil. It's not bare. It's not going to blow away in the wind when it's dry out this summer. You really want to either keep it. You have a winter cover crop, have straw, have leaves, have some kind of plant holding that soil together, or have a tarp we use a lot of black tarps. You just do not want to leave your soil bare as much as possible.
What I find so fascinating about this last mix that we looked at is that with part of our cover crop continuing to grow and part of it winter killing, we'll have the parts that have died through the season at various cold points of the year starting to lay down onto the soil, insulate the soil a little bit. And although it will be slow because it will be cold, and cold deters decomposition, as they start to break down a little bit, they'll be feeding the plants that are continuing to grow. So it will kind of create its own fertilizer to keep that process going until the final termination of that cover crop in the spring. So at this point, we will take any questions that you have. And I see a few questions have popped up in the chat. One is, what do we think about growing corn as a cover crop in the summer? Now, my initial thought is that corn would not be a strong cover crop choice because it is a very heavy feeder of nitrogen as well as several other nutrients. It's really asking a lot of the soil, of the nutrients that it wants, instead of returning those nutrients to the soil. But a cover crop on the shoulder seasons, before and after that corn is grown, would be a really strong plan to help make that corn healthier and to replenish some of the soil nutrients that are needed in growing corn. Plus, it would make me sad to not have any of that wonderful sweet corn for human consumption. And our cover crops are those that we don't plan to eat or sell. Anything you want to add to those thoughts, Pat? I think you're muted, my friend. We can't hear you. Better type your responses in our chat box. In the meantime, we've got some general seeking of good, clean straw for cover mats. Anybody in the audience who has guidance on a good source for straw without weed seed or chemicals, we'd love to get your input. Absolutely. After harvesting corn, you could put the corn plants in compost. You could also chop up that material a little bit more finely and use that to help to build your soil organic matter. You will definitely accrue some benefits from that. The only exception we would have to that practice with other crops is if you had a sick crop. For example, blighted tomatoes, you would not want to introduce that diseased plant material to the soil. Other questions? You can type them in the box. You can turn on your microphone and ask us aloud. Pat has actually found decent straw on Craigslist. It is one circumstance in which it's a benefit to know your farmer, one of many, so that you can have a resource to ask about practices. Make sure that that straw has not been treated with herbicides, which would have, naturally a detrimental effect on the crops you might plant after it, as well as maybe out of line with your organic values. So that's a great question. Cover cropping in high tunnels. Still can't hear you, Pat. Short answer is yes. We have used cover cropping in high tunnels, or at least planned around cover cropping in high tunnels, particularly when you are opening new ground, kind of like I mentioned with home gardens. But as Pat points out, it will take a much colder frost to winter kill in your high tunnel. So be mindful of that. You might have to make a different choice, or perhaps terminate with a more mechanical process like chopping your cover crop down rather than simply letting the winter get to it. So we are almost at the end of our time together, and thank you for all the questions. Keep them coming if you've got more that's on your mind. But I want to share our contact info with you. As I mentioned at the start, this class is brought to you by the AMI Farm and Augusta Health. We are a production and teaching farm, nourishing our hospital and community. We believe that healthy food is fundamental to excellent preventative health care, and that gardening and food literacy education matter to people of all ages, because the choices we make today will impact us all far down the line. So if you have got a question Today or in the coming days, as you review this presentation, we'll be putting it up on YouTube for anyone to access and also sending you the slides. Feel free to reach out to me, and together our team will try to get you a good answer to any of your questions. There's one more question before we go. Edible passion vine that was cut down, would that add any nutrient in the soil if used as a cover mat? That is an excellent question, which I don't know the answer to. I know nothing about passion vine and as far as its nutrient composition, but what I can say is that even in the absence of any specific nutrient that you're getting from a certain crop, you're always getting a benefit from incorporating green matter into the soil by giving your soil microbiology something to feed on and building that organic matter in your soil. With the exception, as Pat points out, of black walnut.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you again.
Yeah, black walnut. I would do your homework on the passion vine. I'm not quite sure, but like Grayson said, if it's if there's no negative effects online or from anybody else, any kind of carbon's going to do you well. And I really wanted to talk about high tunnel cover cropping, because that's something I'm very interested in as well. You can definitely cover crop in high tunnels. Just again, having a plan for your cover crop. And one thing I really want to experiment next year. And this is kind of, I'll type it in the chat, but it's called bioremediation. It's using mustard cover crop as remediating your soils. Grayson, I think, referred to in one of her slides, but it's using that cover crop to kind of cleanse your soil of soil-borne diseases. So I'll type that into the chat there. So like using that after your tomatoes before a tomato plant. And that's what, yeah. So.
A fun fact about the off-farm use of cover crops and bioremediation. One of the best bioremediators that we know of that helps clean up Superfund sites where soil in urban areas in particular is really contaminated, is the word I'm searching for, with things like heavy metals, are not only sunflowers, but oxeye daisies. So depending on the use that you're searching for, sometimes your cover crop can be really beautiful and beneficial in that manner too. So we love flowers wherever we can fit them on the farm, and also appreciate the benefits that they give us for our native pollinators. Our pollinators love our stands of buckwheat as well as our rows of cut flowers.
The bioremediation I'm talking about in the chat, that's more the mustard flower seeds. Yeah, it's a mustard green. One of the Johnny's, if you go on Johnny's website, they have they sell cover crop seed. It's mustards. I'm actually not quite sure on the exact plant, but a lot of actually brassica plants, meaning your broccoli and your cabbage, they don't. They're kind of cleansing. They're not. Not how to say this, but they don't interact with the mycorrhizal network at all. So it's kind of an interesting fact.
Another use of brassicas that we learned a little bit about in researching this class, though we haven't put it into play on the AMI farm in Augusta Health because it's not one of the challenges we're facing, is that brassicas, like turnips are a brassica, right? And certain kinds of radishes can really have an impact on soil compaction. So if we needed to really open up a very packed, tight, dense section of soil, there are certain kinds of cover crop, radishes in particular, that can help to break up soil clods and really create some more space for water infiltration, as well as just a more favorable soil texture. So that's another fun fact to share with you. Well, it is now after 5:30. So thanks to all who joined us. We're so glad to have you here and had some great questions from the audience. We'll stay on for a minute more in case folks have any other pressing questions, but we feel fortunate to have you join us tonight. And feel free to reach out if you have anything further you'd like to ask, or even a suggestion about classes you'd like to see from AMI and the AMI Farm at Augusta Health in the future. Okay, the silence is speaking for the majority. We're going to stop the presentation now. Thanks again for joining us tonight.